In the previous video, we looked at how representations are constructed in the media. As always, if you've not seen that, go and check it out. In this video, we are going to look at the ways that media can be a vehicle to challenge those representations. We looked at how queer folk, people of colour and women were all represented in the media. And we also took a deep dive into an episode of Entourage to unpack the representation of masculinity. The format of this video is going to be pretty straightforward. I'm going to work my way backwards and give you examples of media work that challenges all the representations I discussed in that video and break down the ways they go about doing that challenging. So let's not waste any time. First up, we'll tackle masculinity. In Season 2, Episode 2 of Entourage, we were given a truly top-shelf look at what explicit toxic masculinity looks like. So who's doing it differently? Well, I'll try and keep it as a close a comparison as I can. So we need a TV comedy. It needs to be about rich and famous people. It needs to have a principal cast predominantly made up of men. It needs to have a strong thematic focus on trying to achieve greatness and success. But it needs to do all of those things whilst not reinforcing toxic ideals of masculinity. And if possible, I don't know, maybe even addressing them. I choose you, Ted Lasso. Ted Lasso follows the trials and tribulations of London soccer club Richmond FC and their titular, inexperienced American coach, Ted Lasso. For a show that, like I mentioned before, is hitting a surprisingly similar set of characteristics, this show could not be more different from Entourage in feel and style. I said that Entourage had a deeply cynical, borderline nihilistic take on life and relationships. Ted Lasso has a deeply hopeful and optimistic one, but not naively so. Characters can and do hurt each other in the show, but when they do, the consequences of those actions are explored. Sometimes characters grow and take accountability, but others don't. But mostly what we see in the show is the funny, fraught, messy, sometimes painful process of people growing, changing and learning. What you will never see in Ted Lasso is a male character actively being shamed for having feelings or boundaries. And when male characters are engaging in toxic behaviour, it's never seen in a positive light. There are a few good examples to pull from, but I think this one best exemplifies the show's approach to masculinity. In this scene, Richmond have just suffered a humiliating loss to Manchester. Jamie Tart, the team's biggest star, used to play for Manchester and has a dysfunctional relationship with his abusive father, who still barracks for his old team instead of supporting his son's new team.
Mr. Tart? You have a visitor? Says he's your father?
Yeah.
Are you decent? I told you, Rick. Oh, gentlemen. Oh. Hey, it's a tough one, lads. Yeah, it's a tough one, but no shame to it. Because, you know, we only ever be everybody we play. So you pups had no chance. Oh, and there he is, my son. My own flesh and blood. Poor Jamie, my son. Now, maybe I'm thinking his heart's still in Manchester and that's why he missed that sitter in the first half. Oh. Woo! Are you absolutely baldy? You're baldy, what were you thinking? Oh, I'm only kidding, eh? Hey, look, do us a favour and get them born bug past security. They want to go on the pitch, take a few snaps and all that, yeah?
Rather him not.
Yeah, they just want to look around, it'll only take a second.
I'd rather him not.
What? You're not going to go little moody bitch just because you got your ass served to you on a plate, are you?
Don't speak to me like that. Huh? Don't speak to me like that. Don't speak to me like that.
Okay, well, let's see if you can hear this. You know that ickle TV show you made? You just made it easier for Manchester City to kick you to the curb. Look where you are now. Twaddling about with a bunch of amateurs. No offence. Huh? Don't turn your back on me, you pussy. Oh, yeah. Okay, you can have that one for free. Time to go, big time. Hey, let's have it, Jamie. Don't you forget where you came from. Watch the door. Oops.
Now, for a relatively short and simple scene, there's actually a lot of really impressive craft on display here. Let's unpack this scene and look at all the ways it challenges a typical representation of masculinity. First, the father character, James Tart Sr. He is coded as a true villain in this scene, mocking and deriding the team whose change room he's in. Everyone in the room clearly hates him and wants him to leave. After teasing the team generally, he starts abusing his own son viciously and without restraint. The director of the episode, Matt Lipsey, gives us no music or even general room noise to hide the abuse in. We, like the rest of the team, have to sit and watch in painful, uncomfortable silence whilst Jamie is abused by his father and becomes more and more visibly upset by the barrage. Already, this is a huge break from typical representations of masculinity. Usually, it's accepted for men to say awful, mean things to one another under the guise of banter and taking the piss. It is a mark of deep pride and achievement within conventional representations of masculinity to be able to maintain a calm, even uncaring response to even the cruelest and most hurtful verbal attacks. Simply put, real men don't look sad when other men say mean things about them, especially when they are...
I'm only kidding, eh?
But that's not what we see in this scene. Through a combination of Phil Dunster's excellent acting and director of photography Vanessa White's also excellent lens and framing choice, Jamie looks like a scared, ashamed, deeply hurt little kid here. Having withstood the abuse so far, Jamie's dad then wants Jamie to pose for pictures with his mates before they head out on the town drinking. This is a bridge too far for Jamie. In this moment, a more typical representation of masculinity would have Jamie respond to his father in the only negative emotion men are allowed to have, anger. But that is also challenged here. Instead, we get this.
Rather him not.
Yeah, they just want to look around. It'll only take a second.
I'd rather him not.
Jamie quietly asserting a boundary with his dad. Despite all his abuse so far, Jamie still speaks respectfully to his dad, simply saying, "I'd rather not." And how does his dad respond? He drops any pretense at humour and jest and now goes fully on the attack.
Well, you're not going to all go little moody bitch just because you got your ass served to you on a plate, are you?
This would typically give even the most restrained, good guy representations of real men all the cover they need to lash out furiously, by this stage usually physically, defending their impugned honour and pride by fighting. But instead we get this.
Don't speak to me like that. Huh? Don't speak to me like that. Don't speak to me like that.
Now Jamie's not calm here. It's clear that he is on the ragged edge of control, but without yelling or behaving in any way aggressive, tells his father not to behave disrespectfully to him. This is, again, deeply subversive of typical representations of men. I'm sure many members of the audience, potentially even you as well at this point, were crying out for Jamie to beat his father down. Because of the world we live in and the media representations most of us have grown up with, many of us ache for Jamie's dad to be taught a lesson by Jamie through violence. It's what real men would do. But when it finally happens, because his father attacks him first, once more, what we would expect to happen doesn't happen.
Huh? Don't turn your back on me, you pussy!
Usually we would hear a triumphant swell in the music. Jamie would look angry but righteous. He would be shot in a way to reinforce that as well. Lots of low camera angles and tight shots emphasizing his newfound power and mastery over the situation, with heaps of reaction shots that mirror what the audience would be experiencing. Expressions that said, "Hell yeah, stick it to him, got what was coming." Instead, we get this. And this. And these. Dunster's acting doesn't look triumphant or powerful. He's on the edge of tears. Vanessa White's cinematography holds Jamie just as it did before, making him seem small, scared, and under attack. Lipsey's direction doesn't give us a triumphant swell in music. It doesn't give us any music at all. And the reaction shots continue to show shocked uncertainty, almost horror, at what's happened. The scene concludes with the ultimate subversion of typical representations of masculinity.
Watch out now, take every word.
with the character of Roy, himself the most gruff, sweary man's man in the show, walking over to Jamie, not to congratulate him, or to pat him on the back, or to say good job or well done, but to hold him while he cries. And in case there was any doubt about how you're supposed to be feeling as the audience, we get our first and only musical cue in the scene as George Harrison's Beware of Darkness begins to play. A deeply, properly sad song. This scene is sad. You as the audience are supposed to feel not triumphant that Jamie has taught his father a lesson by beating him down, but deeply sad that Jamie had to use violence to protect himself from his own father, one of the people who's supposed to make him feel safe and loved and supported. Okay, masculinity covered. What's a good example of the media being used as a vehicle to challenge the way that women are represented in the media? Well, as previously discussed, women have a long history of objectification in the media, sexual and otherwise. So we're looking for an example from mainstream media of a female-coded character whose sex, gender, sexuality, etc. has little to no impact on her characterization or story arc. It'd be even better if it came from a genre that had a long and well-established track record of objectification, sexualization, and generally simple one-dimensional female characters that serve little more purpose than to justify the male characters doing stuff. Even better would be if it came from a director who had made a habit of leaning all the way in on sexualizing the female characters in his movies. I give to you 2022 Michael Bay action thriller Ambulance. After a decade of making a Transformers movie every other year, I think Michael Bay was like fed up with working with VFX people or something, and he wanted to return to his old school Bayhem roots, more in keeping with films like Bad Boys and The Rock. Ambulance is a 2-and-a-bit-hour action romp that starts off with these two brothers robbing this bank. It goes south. This cop gets shot. This paramedic comes to help him. The brothers hijack the ambulance with the cop and paramedic inside. Very long, splody, drony car chase ensues. That's the whole movie. It's still bad, but it's very silly. It's a silly, splody, chasey, yelly movie. And crucially, it in no way is trying to be all significant and make statements about things. I say that because sure, there's heaps of examples of media art texts that challenge the objectification and sexualization of women, but there are still vanishingly few examples in movies like Ambulance. And yet, Ambulance actually does right by its one significant female character. Only one. Hotshot LA paramedic Cam, played by Isa Gonzalez. She is characterized as a good paramedic, but a lone wolf who doesn't really play well with others and who's suited to the work because she struggles to maintain relationships with people. Patients, friends, co-workers, even family.
I'm broke.
Here you go, your latte. Really? Drinking a beer on the job? Guess you were a little traumatized after all.
Zero alcohol, dude.
Oh, her from this batch? Little girl from earlier, Lindsay? She's gonna make it. I figured you'd want to know.
Nope.
No?
No, Scott, I don't want to know.
What? Oh, I saw the way you handled the whole situation, and you were just so calm and cool. I was freaking out. That's why I want to do this job, you know?
Scott, I'm gonna give you some advice because you're new and you talk too much.
Yeah, I do.
It's just a job, nothing else. You pick them up, drop them, forget it. The worst day of their lives is just your Tuesday afternoon.
Ah. Okay, so what they say about you is true. That's a bummer.
But you're just gonna drop that? Oh, you want me to take the bait? Okay, give it to me.
You're the best paramedic in town. You can keep anyone alive for 20 minutes, and no one wants to be your partner. I did my research.
Well, there's definitely something wrong with me, Scott.
This interaction over lunch with her new partner in nearly any other movie would feature this dude asking out the conventionally attractive woman he's been partnered with. But instead, none of that gets mentioned, and this interaction could well have taken place between two women or guys or whatever. Her sex doesn't come into it. That keeps up for the rest of the movie. No characters make passing remarks about her looks or her body or remind the audience that despite being a paramedic, she is first and always a sexual object. But it's not just story and dialogue that sexualizes in a text. The way women are shot in these films plays a huge part in their objectification and sexualization. Nowhere in this film is Gonzalez shot that way. We have no conveniently timed interruptions while she's getting changed. As a paramedic, she's doing CPR throughout like half of this film. Gonzalez must have been tired. But there's no gratuitous shots either down her shirt or from behind. Somewhere about 2/3 of the way through the film, she takes off her uniform shirt. And again, typically this would be an opportunity for her to either be in a bra for the rest of the film, or at the very least, some kind of tiny semi-transparent top that's like 4 sizes too small, so it puts as much of her body on display as possible. Nope, instead she's wearing an entirely nondescript white tee. It's not low cut, it's not particularly tight, it looks like the sort of shirt a real human person might wear under a uniform. They don't even contrive an excuse for her to get all like wet and the t-shirt to go see-through at any point. If you think I'm exaggerating this stuff for the sake of comedy, I'm really not. These sorts of cheap tricks and flimsy excuses have been used for decades as a way to sexualize women in the media, especially media that's created primarily for men. And if you think I'm out of hand, watch literally any episode of Entourage and tell me I'm wrong. Now don't get me wrong. Ambulance is by no means a feminist tour de force. As I said before, it is not a film that's trying to be anything serious at all. It has things like this.
It's cashmere!
And this.
Chill out. Chill out. I gotta chill out.
Hit me up. Hit me up.
You rock the 80s. Right here it is! Say, takes me away to where I always want to be.
But I think it's a good example to highlight that even otherwise powerfully mainstream media can still be used as a vehicle to challenge the typical representations we're used to seeing. Okay, so we've looked at how representations of masculinity and women can be challenged. We've still got to look at how people of colour and queer people are represented. And in order to keep the length of this video down, I'm going to go for a 2-for-1 on this and use a single text to look at both. One I've mentioned in prior videos. Moonlight is a 2016 film by Barry Jenkins that won the Best Picture Oscar. It follows the story of Chiron through 3 different phases of his life as a small child, a teenager, and a man. It explores his experience being black and gay and poor in Miami. Because it gives us insight into 3 very different parts of his life, we see 3 very different sides to Chiron, none of which could be described as simplistic or stereotypical. In part 1 of the last video, I talked about how humans are tremendously complex creatures that sit at the crossroads of so many different aspects of identity, and Moonlight offers a beautiful insight into that reality through the character of Chiron. The fact that he's gay and black and male and poor are not isolated aspects of himself, but deeply interwoven and often in conflict with one another. But most relevantly to our discussion, representations of black men, gay men, and gay black men don't often look like this. I mentioned in the previous video that when it comes to queer representation in the media, it sort of has to do with proximity to privilege. The whiter you are, the maler you are, the richer you are while being gay, meant that you had a better chance of seeing yourself represented. But even when gay black characters are shown to us, they were and still often are drawing from a narrow subset of different queer communities. To put it more simply, this is what we see a lot of when it comes to gay black men, even today. Now I want to be clear, this isn't bad. It's really important that we tell the stories of black queerness like these ones. But if these are the only stories we see of black queerness, that's a problem. A problem Moonlight spends 111 minutes addressing. Chiron's character is complex and multifaceted, and his journey an incredibly painful and unfair one in most ways. Now, I said that Moonlight makes Chirone's queerness and blackness inextricable from one another in the text, but I've been talking so far mostly about how his queerness is represented. In the previous video, I said that when it comes to the representations of people of colour, some of the issues we see are tokenism and one-dimensional stereotypes. I think we've already touched on how Moonlight conveys a non-stereotypical representation of the main character of Chirone. But what about the other characters? Juan is simultaneously dealing the drugs that Chirone's mother is addicted to and offering Chirone the most care, love, and understanding of any character. Paula, Chirone's mother, is an abusive drug addict, and she's also a working single mum with no support, and also a recovering addict who desperately wants an adult Chirone to understand that she loved him and that she's sorry. The representation of the black characters in this movie are complex, nuanced portrayals that never stray into cliche or stereotype. But what about tokenism? Well, the key to tokenism as a type of representation is proximity to whiteness. That is, token characters of colour exist solely to provide something for a main white character. Well, Moonlight definitely doesn't engage in tokenism either, because there are no white characters in this movie at all. Now, there have certainly been all-black movies before Moonlight, but they didn't achieve the same kind of widespread critical or commercial success that Moonlight did. Generally, all-black casts were seen by mainstream audiences as movies for black people. But Moonlight is the story of a gay black kid growing up in the housing projects of Miami. Jenkins, the director, was a gay black kid growing up in the housing projects of Miami. It's largely a memoir. It doesn't have white people in it because Jenkins didn't have a lot of white people in his life either. When it comes to representations of black people, Moonlight was so significant because it doesn't concern itself with a white perspective. It doesn't pander to it, nor does it go out of its way to be in opposition to it. It tells a very authentic story of blackness for anyone who wants to see it, and sadly, this is still really rare. Moonlight is a text that challenges the representation of queer black men and black people more generally. Ambulance is an example of a very mainstream action movie which challenges the representation of women as sexualized objects. And Ted Lasso is a comedy TV series which challenges the representation of masculinity. These are all really good examples that you could use in your essays and comparative examples, but make sure you find the ways that the main texts that you're studying challenge representations as well.